Have you ever imagined that in the future, humanity will not only stop at Earth, but could also live on Mars, mine minerals from asteroids, or even build floating cities in space? That may sound like something straight out of a science fiction novel, but in fact, many technologies that we once only saw in movies are now gradually becoming reality. So, what secret could shorten space journeys from months down to just a few days? In this video, we will explore the technology that may change the future of humanity. And trust me, you will be surprised by what is being tested right now. Don't forget to hit subscribe and stay until the end of the video so you won't miss any details. If you have ever seen a giant rocket launched from Earth, you would witness a scene both magnificent and somewhat wasteful. Millions of liters of fuel burned just to get a small fraction of the mass beyond the atmosphere. This is the very dilemma that the aerospace industry has faced for decades. To travel farther, we are forced to carry more fuel, and this, in turn, makes the spacecraft heavier, requiring even more fuel to lift it. It is a never-ending loop. Chemical rockets, from Saturn V in the Apollo era to today's Artemis SLS, are all based on the same principle: heating up fuel, creating enormous pressure, and expelling exhaust gases backward at high speed. The principle of conservation of momentum ensures that if the gases are pushed down, the rocket will be pushed up. But the limitation of this approach lies in the fact that the exhaust velocity cannot exceed a certain threshold, as it is bound by chemical reactions. If you want to go faster, you cannot endlessly increase the exhaust speed. You can only burn more. And as we have seen, that is not a sustainable trade-off. Imagine sitting in a car that must carry hundreds of fuel barrels just to travel a few hundred kilometers. Sounds absurd, right? But that is exactly what is happening with modern rockets. NASA calculates that just a trip to Mars would require millions of liters of fuel. And no matter how much is carried, the spacecraft will run out of fuel at some point. This explains why, in reality, such a journey takes up to 7 months, because humans are forced to follow the most fuel-efficient trajectories instead of flying straight. So where does the solution lie? The answer comes from an idea that sounds like science fiction, but is actually based on very solid physics. Instead of pushing a lot of mass backward, why not accelerate it to much higher speeds? That is precisely the operating principle of the ion engine. Unlike chemical rockets, ion engines do not burn fuel to create thrust. Instead, they use electricity to turn fuel, usually a noble gas such as xenon, into charged ions, then accelerate them with electric and magnetic fields. The result is that these tiny ions leave the chamber at incredible speeds, reaching more than 146,000 kilometers per hour. You can imagine, instead of throwing large rocks backward to push a sled forward, you fire tiny bullets at supersonic speeds. Although each particle has very little mass, their extremely high velocity means that the total momentum generates thrust far more efficiently than traditional methods. To see the difference, consider this. A chemical rocket achieves about 35% fuel efficiency. Meanwhile, an ion engine can reach up to 90%. This means that with the same amount of fuel, a spacecraft using ion propulsion can travel much farther while continuously accelerating for months or even years. And that small, steady acceleration, when accumulated, can bring the spacecraft's speed up to 320,000 kilometers per hour, more than 10 times the maximum speed of the space shuttle. Sounds amazing, doesn't it? But the question is, if they are so superior, why haven't we seen Mars missions using ion engines? The reason lies in a surprising fact. The thrust generated by an ion engine is extremely small. So small, in fact, that if you placed your hand in front of an ion thruster, the force you would feel is comparable to the weight of a sheet of paper resting on your hand. This means that ion engines are virtually useless when it comes to escaping Earth's massive gravity. They only truly shine once the spacecraft is already in space, where there is no drag, no atmosphere, and time becomes an ally. This is why, in reality, ion engines have been used, but mainly for specialized missions. For example, modern communication satellites from the Soviet era to today's SpaceX Starlink satellites all use ion thrusters to maintain and adjust their orbits. They do not need massive thrust, but rather light, steady, and efficient force, exactly what ion propulsion provides. In fact, China's Tiangong space station is equipped with 4 Hall effect thrusters, a type of ion engine, to maintain a stable orbit for thousands of hours. Another example is NASA's Deep Space One mission. In 1998, this spacecraft demonstrated that ion propulsion was fully viable for long journeys, as it successfully rendezvoused with an asteroid and later the comet Borrelly. More recently, the DART mission, famous for crashing into an asteroid to test trajectory deflection, also used an ion engine as a backup system. These demonstrations show that, while still limited, ion propulsion is gradually proving its place in aerospace. However, many challenges remain. The first is power. Ion engines require extremely large amounts of electricity to accelerate ions, and this limits their thrust capacity. In deep space, where sunlight weakens, solar panels are not always sufficient to provide power. Scientists are researching the use of mini nuclear reactors to solve this problem, but of course, sending a nuclear reactor into space raises a host of safety and cost concerns. Another difficulty lies in the fuel. Xenon, the gas most favored for ion engines, is extremely rare and expensive. Its price reaches thousands of dollars per kilogram. Although it is consumed in smaller amounts compared to chemical rockets, when calculated for long missions, this cost is significant. Research teams are experimenting with argon, cheaper and more abundant, but the efficiency cannot yet match xenon. And finally, there is the issue of durability. Ion engines operate by maintaining delicate electromagnetic fields. If there is charge leakage or ions from the outside environment interfere, the system can lose balance and shut down. Engineers are still working on solutions so that ion engines can run continuously for tens of thousands of hours without interruption. For ion engines or any space propulsion technology to become the main vehicle carrying humanity farther, the core factor does not lie in engineering design alone, but in the energy source. We can build sophisticated engines with nearly perfect efficiency, but if there is not enough energy to power them, all calculations are meaningless. This is when humanity must face a fundamental question: how do we access an almost limitless energy supply? On a planetary scale, we are still heavily dependent on fossil fuels. Coal, oil, natural gas, all are remnants of life millions of years ago, and their quantities are finite. Global statistics show that about 80% of the energy humanity consumes comes from these sources. And with the pace of population growth, urbanization, and ever increasing technological demand, this reserve will surely be depleted within just a few centuries. You may say, then why not use wind, tides, geothermal, or nuclear energy? Yes, they are all feasible and necessary solutions, but let's look at the bigger picture. Humanity today consumes about 400 trillion joules of energy each year. This enormous figure is only enough for 8 billion people. Imagine a few centuries later when the population could double, triple, or even increase by tens of times. At that point, today's green energy sources, while useful, may still not be sufficient to sustain an entire civilization expanding beyond Earth. And so our gaze must turn to the sky. There, the sun radiates an immense energy supply far beyond imagination. Just the amount of sunlight hitting Earth in a single hour is enough to provide energy for all of humanity for an entire year. The problem is not that the sun does not give us enough, but that we do not yet know how to collect it efficiently. This idea once led a brilliant physicist, Freeman Dyson, to think seriously. In 1960, he proposed a bold hypothesis. If a civilization wanted to access energy on a stellar scale, it could surround its star with a collection of massive structures designed to capture all its radiation. That collection later became known by the familiar name, the Dyson sphere. Imagine this concept. Instead of capturing only a tiny fraction of sunlight from the sun as we do today, humanity would deploy billions or even trillions of solar panels in orbit around the sun, linked together into a gigantic swarm. This structure would not be a solid, rigid sphere that is far beyond our current capabilities, but rather a Dyson swarm. Countless synchronized orbital satellites forming a vast network to collect energy. When sunlight is converted into electricity at this scale, humanity will step into an entirely new level of civilization. If today we are only at level 0 on the Kardashev scale, a measure of how much energy a civilization can harness, then with a Dyson sphere we would approach level 2, controlling the energy of an entire star. That would not only enable ultra-powerful ion engines, but also allow the deployment of other propulsion technologies, even science fiction concepts like warp drives or laser sails. In fact, simple calculations alone are enough to astonish you. The sunlight reaching Earth accounts for only a tiny fraction of the sun's total radiation. If we could collect all the energy from our star, that figure would be 10,000 times humanity's current total consumption. This means that even if Earth's population rose to tens of trillions, we would still have surplus energy for everyone. Of course, this idea currently sounds insane. We do not yet have the technology to mass produce satellites cheaply enough to deploy billions of them, nor do we have a system for interplanetary scale material transport. But remember, a century ago, putting humans on the moon was considered impossible. And yet today, not only have we done it, but we are also preparing to send humans to Mars. Interestingly, in the search for extraterrestrial life, scientists have also considered the possibility of detecting Dyson spheres. A star surrounded by an energy harvesting structure would emit unusual signatures in its light spectrum, which telescopes could observe. If one day we see such signs, it would mean that somewhere in the universe, a civilization has advanced thousands of years beyond us. Thus, the Dyson sphere is not just a science fiction dream, but also a long-term strategic goal. If humanity truly wants to enter the era of interplanetary travel, building star-scale energy harvesting megastructures is an option we cannot ignore. Ion engines may be the first step, but stellar energy is the key to making that dream a reality. You may be thinking, this must take thousands of years. And yes, perhaps it will. But remember, even now, the small pieces are beginning to form. Space-based solar power projects are being tested. Companies like SpaceX and Blue Origin are drastically reducing the cost of launching satellites and materials. And as automation, artificial intelligence, and space mining robots develop, a Dyson swarm may no longer be a distant fantasy. If that day comes, humanity will no longer have to worry about energy crises. Cities on Mars will shine like New York, spacecraft will depart weekly for distant asteroids, and energy will become the foundation for our expansion across the solar system. The Dyson sphere, in a sense, is the bridge between science fiction and reality, between dream and possibility. And the only question left is how long until we dare to begin building it? When it comes to space travel, many people often picture giant ships gliding among the stars or dazzling colonies glowing on Mars. But the harsh reality is that the greatest barrier to turning those dreams into reality does not only lie in engines or energy, but in cosmic radiation, the silent enemy that we cannot see or touch, yet one powerful enough to determine the fate of any astronaut. Even here on Earth, our bodies are constantly exposed to small doses of radiation from rocks, air, and background cosmic rays. Fortunately, the magnetic field and thick atmosphere serve as a natural shield, protecting us from most of the high-energy particles from the sun, as well as cosmic rays from outside the galaxy. The moment we step outside this invisible armor, humans are immediately faced with an entirely different environment, radiation doses hundreds of times higher. Take a concrete example. When the Apollo astronauts set foot on the moon, they faced radiation levels 200 times higher than on Earth. Luckily, the missions were short, just a few days, and they avoided major solar storms. But imagine a journey lasting months, even years, to Mars. That would be an entirely different story. Recent studies estimate that a round trip to Mars could expose an astronaut to more than 1,200 millisieverts of radiation, far exceeding the lifetime safety limit set by space agencies. Once this threshold is reached, the astronaut would never again be allowed to leave Earth. What is even more frightening is that radiation not only causes short-term effects such as nausea, fatigue, or acute damage, but it also silently damages DNA, leading to genetic mutations, cancer, and many other chronic diseases. It can destroy reproductive cells, cause infertility, and even affect humanity's ability to sustain its lineage if we dream of long-term settlement beyond Earth. In other words, before discussing colonies or resource exploitation, we must first answer a vital question. How do we survive cosmic radiation? There are several approaches being studied. The simplest is shielding with materials. Water, for example, is one of the best natural shields because of its high molecular density, capable of absorbing energetic particles. This idea opens the possibility of building space habitats surrounded by tanks of water or liquid fuel, turning the very resources needed for the journey into protective armor. Some studies even suggest that on Mars we could build bases underground or beneath polar ice layers to use natural water as radiation shielding. However, material shielding comes with the problem of weight. The more protective layers, the heavier the spacecraft, meaning launch costs multiply. That is why scientists are exploring bolder ideas: artificial magnetic fields. In theory, if we could create a strong enough magnetic shield around a spacecraft, we could mimic Earth's protective mechanism, deflecting high energy particles before they hit the crew. NASA and ESA have tested some small plasma magnetic field designs, but this technology is still far from feasible for long duration interplanetary travel. In addition, some research groups are proposing an even more radical solution: genetic modification of humans. If radiation cannot be completely eliminated, why not change the body itself to withstand it better? This is a controversial idea, but one that many scientists consider inevitable if humanity truly wants to settle on other planets. By adjusting DNA repair mechanisms, or even inserting genetic sequences found in radiation resistant organisms like tardigrades, humans could become a kind of post human, capable of surviving in the harsh environments we currently only see in science fiction films. This brings us back to a larger question: what does it mean to be human? Would a genetically modified individual capable of enduring radiation many times higher than normal still be considered human as we understand it today? Or would that mark the beginning of an entirely new evolutionary branch, born not of nature but of the hand of civilization itself? Perhaps the answer will not come immediately. But one thing is certain: to expand beyond Earth, we must change. Whether by building massive physical shields, inventing force field technology, or even redefining our biological bodies, the path ahead remains full of challenges. And just as the wildest ideas in science fiction, from warp drives to Dyson spheres, have gradually found a place in laboratories, is the solution to radiation may also lie within research that today we still call impossible. If one day you look up at the sky and see not just satellites but massive colonies floating in space, remember that we got there not only thanks to powerful ships, but also thanks to adaptability, the ability to redefine ourselves, to step out of Earth's cradle and into the vast cosmos. If we are truly serious about making space our second home, then spacecraft technology alone is not enough. Humans were designed to live on Earth, with a protective atmosphere, a shielding magnetic field, and abundant food sources. Once we leave this safe haven, our bodies will have to face an extremely harsh environment: cosmic radiation, changing gravity, extreme temperatures, and even types of microorganisms we have never encountered before. That is why many scientists believe that genetic modification is not only a medical tool, but also the key to unlocking the era of interplanetary migration. Imagine a new generation of astronauts carrying within them traits that nature has never granted humanity. This could be the ability to repair DNA when damaged by radiation, similar to how certain bacteria and tardigrades do. In the harsh conditions of space, where protons and gamma rays constantly bombard every cell, such a trait would be nothing less than a genetic suit of armor. What currently requires medicine or bulky physical shields could in the future become an innate ability. But it doesn't stop at mere resistance. Genetic technology also opens up the prospect of active adaptation. For example, if one day humanity settles in icy places like Europa, Jupiter's moon, implanting genes from bacteria that live in permafrost could allow the human body to function at near 0 degrees Celsius. Conversely, if we aim to colonize scorching worlds like Mercury or planets close to their stars, DNA from thermophilic species could enable our bodies to survive without damage. In other words, instead of carrying thousands of tons of life support equipment, humans themselves would become the ultimate survival machine. In reality, this idea is no longer so far-fetched. CRISPR technology has proven that editing or replacing defective gene segments is entirely possible. Clinical trials have shown that many genetic diseases once considered death sentences now hold hope for a cure. And if we can eliminate disease, why not add new traits? Eyes that can see in the dark, lungs that can utilize extremely low oxygen, or even the ability to breathe underwater. All of these could be written into our genetic code. Of course, this raises a series of ethical questions. If a group of people are genetically upgraded to live on Mars, would they still be considered the same species as us? If humans are hybridized with marine animal genes to breathe underwater, should we still call them human or a new species altogether? History shows that every major scientific leap comes with fierce debates. But once life on Earth is threatened by the sun's expansion, a giant asteroid, or extreme climate change, the choice of not changing may no longer be on the table. And biology is not the only issue. As humans begin to settle on many different worlds, we might witness the emergence of new human races with distinct traits. A group living in low gravity environments might develop tall, slender bodies, while those on high gravity planets might become shorter and more robust. If combined with genetic editing, these differences could become even more profound, to the point that hundreds or thousands of years from now, our descendants on Mars, Europa, or Titan might look at one another and feel as alien as we do when looking at entirely different species on Earth. This leads to a vision both terrifying and fascinating. Humanity will no longer be a single species, but a family of human species. Homo marshalis, Homo europaeus, Homo titanus, each carrying unique genetic adaptations suited to its environment. The question is, will we cooperate as one shared civilization or diverge, even clash, as history on Earth has often shown? In any case, we are not there yet. For now, genetic modification research remains at a basic level, mostly tested in labs and a few clinical cases, but the pace of technological progress today is astonishing. Less than 100 years ago, setting foot on the moon was just a dream, and now we are preparing for the first journeys to Mars. Who can say for certain that in 100 or 200 years, designing genes to adapt to new planets won't become an everyday practice? In the end, perhaps the most important question is not can we, but should we? Technology will keep advancing, and the ability to recreate and enhance humanity will inevitably arrive. But the path we choose, and for what purpose, will determine the entire future of our species. Whether we remain temporary guests in the universe or become a truly multiplanetary species with entirely new evolutionary versions of ourselves. When it comes to space travel, many people immediately think of a grand vision. Gigantic spacecraft leaving the launch pad, blazing across the night sky, carrying hundreds of passengers toward distant stars. But in reality, behind that spectacular scene lies one of the most complex engineering challenges humanity has ever faced: how to lift hundreds of tons of equipment, fuel, and people off Earth, travel millions of kilometers, and then land safely on another planet. This is where bold projects like SpaceX's Starship come into play. Instead of treating space as the domain of small ships carrying a handful of astronauts, like in the Apollo era, Starship is designed with an entirely different vision. It is an interplanetary bus capable of carrying an entire small community. With the capacity to transport around 100 tons of cargo or more than 100 passengers in a single journey, Starship is not just a rocket. It is the first step in making the idea of colonizing Mars a feasible plan. What makes this project unique is not only its scale, but also its philosophy: full reusability. In the past, most rockets could only be used once. After launch, they would fall into the ocean or burn up in the atmosphere. This made each mission cost billions of dollars. But with Starship, everything changes. Both the massive booster and the spacecraft itself are designed to return to Earth and land vertically and be ready to fly again. Like a jet plane that can take off and land multiple times, this reusability promises to drive costs down to the point where even interplanetary travel could become affordable. But what makes Starship so special that the scientific community pays attention? The answer lies in its scale and flexibility. The ship's hull is wide enough to be designed a long-term living space, with bedrooms, communal areas, kitchens, and even gyms for the crew. Imagine stepping inside, not a cramped capsule like Apollo or Soyuz, but a space as large as a small building, where you can move, exercise, eat, and live throughout the 6-month journey to Mars. Of course, 6 months in space isn't just about eating and sleeping. Microgravity causes the body to lose bone mass and muscle, while cosmic radiation constantly bombards cells. This is where supporting technologies shine. Radiation shielding with water or special materials surrounding the habitat, along with specially designed exercise machines to keep the crew healthy. Combined with advances in biomedical science and, as mentioned earlier, the potential of genetic editing, humans may be able to maintain good enough health to land on the red planet without serious risks. When landing comes, it will be a history changing moment. Imagine opening the spacecraft's hatch, stepping onto the red orange dust of Mars, knowing that beneath your feet is another planet, and far in the sky, Earth is nothing more than a small blue star. From that moment on, you are not just a citizen of Earth, but also a citizen of the solar system. But the journey doesn't end there. Mars is only the first stop. Once technologies like Starship prove that large-scale transport of people and cargo between planets is possible, the door to other worlds opens as well. Titan, Europa, or even resource-rich asteroids could become the next waypoints. Each place will bring its own challenges, from toxic atmospheres to freezing temperatures, requiring new innovations, both technological and biological. This brings us back to a deeper philosophical question. Will expanding into space make humanity more united or more divided? On one hand, we could become a multi-planetary civilization where everyone works together to overcome the harsh challenges of space. On the other hand, differences in living environments, technology, and even genetics could gradually create new human communities far removed from us. Perhaps a century from now, those born and raised on Mars will regard Earth as a distant homeland, much like how we look back at prehistoric times today. What is certain is this: we are standing at the edge of a new era. Dreams once confined to science fiction are gradually turning into engineering blueprints. Setting foot on Mars is no longer a question of if, but when. And every technological step forward, from reusable rockets to genetic editing to radiation shielding, brings us a little closer to that day. So, what do you think? If given the chance, would you be ready to leave Earth, board a starship, and embark on a 6-month journey to Mars? Perhaps it won't just be a trip, but the beginning of an entirely new era, one where the question of who we are will have to be rewritten from scratch among the stars. While you are breathing the fragile atmosphere inside the biological domes of Mars, the big question arises: how can we, at a distance of hundreds of millions of kilometers, still stay in touch with Earth? To make it easier to imagine, picture yourself sending a text message, but instead of taking a few seconds, it takes from 5 to 20 minutes to arrive. That is the average signal delay between Mars and Earth. And now multiply that dozens or even hundreds of times if you want to communicate with spacecraft roaming the outer edges of the solar system. The truth is, communication in outer space is one of the harshest challenges modern science must face. Currently, NASA and many other space agencies rely on a massive system called the Deep Space Network, DSN. It is a collection of gigantic antenna dishes, each up to 70 meters in diameter, strategically positioned at 3 locations: California, USA, Madrid, Spain, and Canberra, Australia. This arrangement ensures that no matter how the Earth rotates, at least one of the 3 stations can always see the spacecraft we want to connect with. Metaphorically, these are like enormous radio lighthouses, constantly listening for the faint signals sent from the farthest reaches of the solar system. What is astonishing is that the radio signals sent back by Voyager or Perseverance are so faint that if you tried to capture them with a phone antenna, they would be completely lost in the noise. Yet, with sophisticated amplification and noise filtering technologies, the DSN can still extract the signal from that sea of noise and turn it into images, videos, or scientific data that you and I are able to witness. Remember that the famous pale blue dot photo, taken at a distance of 6 billion kilometers, could only exist thanks to the DSN, a reminder that sometimes the faintest signals can carry the deepest meanings. However, traditional radio technology is beginning to reach its limits. As we dream of sending humans to Mars, mining asteroids, or even building bases on distant moons, the demand for data transmission will skyrocket. A crewed spacecraft will need real-time video communication, medical data, technical instructions, and countless other streams of information. But what happens when today's radio channels are equivalent to the dial-up internet of the 1990s? The answer is laser communication, also known as optical communication. Instead of using low-frequency radio waves, this new technology harnesses highly focused laser light to transmit data. The advantage is bandwidth tens of times greater, enabling the transmission of an HD movie from Mars to Earth in just a few minutes, instead of days or weeks. In 2023, NASA tested the DSOC Deep Space Optical Communications System by equipping the Psyche probe with a laser transmitter. The initial results were very impressive. Transmission speeds far faster than radio waves, opening up the prospect of astronauts on Mars being able to video call Earth, just like you FaceTime with loved ones halfway across the globe. Yet, laser technology also poses challenges. The laser beam is extremely tightly focused, meaning it must be aligned with absolute precision. A deviation of just a few millionths of a degree could cause the signal to drift away into space. In addition, Earth's atmosphere often interferes, scattering the light, which requires ground stations to be built in dry, cloudless regions. This is why NASA is considering building laser reception networks in high, arid mountains, or even on the moon, where no atmosphere gets in the way. But what matters more is the philosophy behind these technologies. Every step forward in space communication is not simply about improving data transmission speed. It is also the spiritual lifeline between Earth and the brave humans who dare to go far. When an astronaut sets foot on Mars, the only thing keeping them from feeling utterly alone in the cold, red desert is the faint yet steadfast light from Earth, transformed into messages, calls, or familiar images. We also cannot overlook the philosophical and social aspects. If, in the future, hundreds or even thousands of people are truly scattered across the solar system, then communication will not only be a matter of technology, it will be the foundation for maintaining community. Today, you might get frustrated when a video call lags, but imagine a family on Mars waiting 20 minutes for a message from Earth to arrive. Will we learn to be more patient, or will we develop new forms of communication to overcome the unavoidable delay? There are also hypotheses that in the future, space communication systems could rely on artificial intelligence to predict and compress information. Instead of transmitting all raw data, AI on spacecraft could process, select the most important parts, and only transmit the essence. This would not only reduce the load on signal systems, but also turn AI into a true crewmate, an assistant that understands the mission and knows what is necessary for humans on Earth. So, is this vision frightening? Some may shiver at the thought that, in the vastness of space, we rely entirely on faint signals sent from Earth. But on the other hand, it is also a testament to humanity's resilience. From a small planet, we have learned to let our voices, images, and hopes echo across billions of kilometers. If in this century you or your descendants truly set foot on Mars, remember that every call, every photo sent will be part of a greater story, the story of how humankind learned to converse with the universe. And perhaps one distant day, when our descendants leave the solar system to reach other stars, they will still carry the belief that no matter how far we go, we will always find a way to connect. From the dawn of the space age, communication has always been the lifeline connecting humans on Earth with astronauts traveling in space. Without signals being transmitted back, every mission, no matter how great, would be like a lonely ship drifting on an endless ocean. That is precisely why NASA created the Deep Space Network, a massive system of antennas located on 3 continents, functioning as gigantic ears of the universe, listening and transmitting data from spacecraft millions or even billions of kilometers away. Perhaps few people know that in 1969, it was this very network that received and broadcast the first images of Neil Armstrong setting foot on the moon, allowing that moment to be shared with hundreds of millions of people around the world. And just a year later, when the Apollo 13 accident occurred, a ruptured oxygen tank preventing the spacecraft from landing, the Deep Space Network once again played the role of savior. The faint signals it captured maintained communication with the spacecraft, enabling engineers on the ground to adjust every detail to bring the astronauts home safely. That was clear proof of the silent yet vital power of space communication technology. But the challenge did not stop there. As humanity sent probes farther, to Mars, to the asteroid belt, or even beyond the borders of the solar system, communication became exponentially more difficult. Radio signals, already weakened by distance, could take from several minutes to many hours to travel from the spacecraft to Earth. For example, New Horizons took more than 2 years to send all the data from its Pluto flyby. 2 years, just to deliver the numbers and photos the entire world was waiting for. That showed that the limits of radio waves had reached the point where a stronger replacement was needed, and that is why laser communication technology emerged. Imagine this: if radio waves are like a small stream flowing slowly, then lasers are like a mighty river, carrying tens or even hundreds of times more data. LCRD, the Laser Communications Relay Demonstration, launched by NASA into orbit in 2021, was the very first test. With it, data transmission speeds could reach up to 1.2 gigabits per second, hundreds of times faster than radio systems. It is nothing less than upgrading from old ADSL lines to high-speed fiber optic internet. Even more interestingly, laser equipment is much smaller and more energy efficient. While ground-based radio antennas can measure up to 70 meters in diameter and occupy enormous areas, the entire LCRD system is only about the size of a large mattress. For spacecraft, this means reduced weight, lower launch costs, and more room for scientific instruments. That is no small advantage in a context where budget and weight are always major constraints. Of course, no technology is perfect. Lasers cannot penetrate thick clouds, which is why NASA must build multiple ground stations in regions with clear skies year-round, such as Hawaii or California. This distribution helps minimize the risk of disruption due to weather. LCRD is currently testing the relay of data from the International Space Station back to Earth, a very promising first step for the future of optical communications. What is even more exciting are the upcoming missions. In the next few years, the Artemis program will return astronauts to the moon, and they will transmit ultra-high definition footage back via lasers. We will not just hear stories or look at blurry photos. We will almost live the moment, witnessing every step on the dusty surface of our satellite in crystal clarity. And further ahead, the Psyche mission to the giant metallic asteroid will test laser technology at a distance of more than 240 million kilometers. If successful, it will mark the beginning of an era in which every interplanetary mission can transmit data rapidly instead of waiting years. But laser technology is not merely a technical solution. It is also symbolic, proof of humanity's relentless drive to go further. Just as the internet completely transformed the world on Earth, optical communication could change the way we connect with the cosmos. One day, when humans set foot on Mars and want to video call their loved ones, it may be this very technology that makes what once seemed impossible a reality. Picture this: instead of waiting 2 years to see a few blurry images, we could receive thousands of videos and billions of scientific data points in a short time. 4K images from distant worlds, unprecedented views of the solar system, all delivered faster than ever. That would not only accelerate science, but also ignite imagination and inspire the next generation of space explorers. It can be said that from the massive radio antennas to the small yet powerful laser beams, all are proof of humanity's long journey. A journey of connection, of conquest, and of turning science fiction dreams into reality. And in the future, when we look back, perhaps we will see that the shift from radio waves to lasers was one of the most important turning points on the path to opening the doors of the universe.